Hi, everybody. Today's May 15th. I'm Dr. Randy Bach. I'm here with Conservative Corner on behalf and in replacement of Mr. Thomas Mountain, who moved mountains to try to be here, but instead moved me to do so because he couldn't surmount the ones he encountered between here and Maryland, apparently, on part of his employment. So we miss you, Tom. Your decision to have me here, I don't vouch for anything that might happen herein. Anyway, I'm honored to have as my guest Mr. Paul Levy, former CEO of Beth Israel, Deaconess Medical Center, et cetera, and most recently and currently school committee person or human, you're human, correct?
I think.
For the city of Newton. And we're going to be talking about some of the cultural aspects of what's been going on in our schools and how best to approach the problem and issue. So during our green room session, Paul, we were talking about at one point parents hoping for some meritocracy in the schools, and I'm going to preface slightly. My kids have graduated the Newton Public Schools, and they're tax-paying citizens and good human specimens, I believe, for the most part, despite genetic dose they got from me. Anyway, but the teenagers I'm talking to, they talk about the absence of some of the honors classes. They've smushed, if that's a technical term, they've merged, subsumed some of the honors classes within the other sections, so that they've kind of, equalizing. If you've heard of Harrison Bergeron from Kurt Vonnegut, I don't know if you know the story. Everyone's equal now, and this part of this equity thrust is to make everything equal. How are we to have a confident, intelligent network of upcoming citizens if we are not honoring honors and we're not producing merit and rewarding it within our school system? Amongst other aspects, they've gotten rid of American history, they've got civics. Anyway, that's a very big question. Are you willing to approach or attack any of that?
Yeah, thanks for having me, first of all. Also, I think I should start out by saying that I'm not quite in your conservative corner, even though I'm on your conservative corner show. In fact, I would tend to put myself more in the liberal side of the political spectrum on many issues. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't talk about it. And in fact, that's exactly the point. And I think that's what worries people in town a lot, that there are different ways to look at what the role of the public schools is. and it's okay to have differences of opinion and to talk about those respectfully and to listen to one another. I was very upset recently when a number of parents, and I know some of these folks personally, and they're liberal Democrats. They're very fine people. They're good-hearted. They're well-intentioned. We're bringing to the school administration, meaning the central administration and the principals, and to the school committee, their concerns that the manner in which the Newton Public Schools was addressing the issue of equity and the manner in which the Newton Public Schools was addressing the issue of academic excellence, they felt should be discussed and modified. And they hit a brick wall in those discussions. And so they decided to file a petition, which they're allowed to do under the city charter. And they got a couple hundred signatures in which they were making a proposal about how to enhance the academic rigor and excellence within the Newton Public Schools. Not to take away from the equity side of things, but to enhance the academic side of things. And they were disparaged and demeaned, and actually many of them felt threatened. They chose not to come, some of them chose not to come to a public hearing for fear of what they would be called at that public hearing, or whether they might even be in physical danger. Now, I don't believe they would have been in physical danger, but I do know what they were called in that hearing. And it was just not appropriate. And this isn't a matter of partisan politics. It's not a matter of conservative, liberal. This is a matter of good people, our neighbors who have children in the schools, having every right in the world to raise their concerns and to engage in a thoughtful discussion. And then the school committee and the school administration can decide to do whatever they decide to do. But that kind of reluctance on the part of the Newton Public Schools to engage in the discussion has a deleterious effect in terms of public confidence in that school administration and indeed in the school committee. And the worst thing that can happen in any community, whether it's Newton or Boston or anywhere, whether it's a conservative leaning town or a liberal leaning town or somewhere in the middle, is for the public to lose confidence in the public schools. Yeah. Because then what happens is you start to see an erosion of support, financial support, through the taxes and so on. And eventually the school starts to deteriorate. It also means that people leave the system. And we've had a large number of people choosing to leave the Newton Public Schools and go to private school. And that's not good either, because then you've lost a constituency for the public schools. And again, the people who are leaving are not necessarily conservatives or liberals or Republicans or Democrats. They're just not satisfied.
Yeah, no, they're parents. They're parents.
That's right.
Their product, I was once a child, and my understanding is you were too. And
I began life as a small child.
Yes, and many of us had parents, and I think we all had parents, whether you had them on board or not, is another question. But you know, my parents, for better or worse, they loved me. I mean, go figure, right? And they're looking out for the best. My parents, both liberal Democrats, you know, but they at a certain point didn't have us in public school at an extreme cost to themselves. We lived in a, you know, I don't want to sound like Monty Python, but we lived in a one-bedroom apartment. There were 5 of us. My 3 brothers and I, we shared what had been a kitchenette. It was literally like a 6x9 room, and we had bunk beds and then, you know, kind of a mat on the floor. But the product that my parents put out, I mean, for better or for worse, you know, I have my education, you know. I have degrees. We all have degrees. We all have graduate degrees. And we've made our ways to better and worse effect in the world. And we were their product. And so they worked really hard. We didn't do vacations. We never went to Europe. We stayed in this, you know, small, you know, apartment because we couldn't, we were in New York City, we couldn't afford to make the move. We couldn't afford to move somewhere else, and we couldn't do everything we were doing. And so parents are willing to sacrifice, and they'll do anything. They'll, you know, the prototypical, I'll run in front of a car to save my kid. Well, that happens metaphorically throughout your existence if and when you have loving parents. And there's no stronger force for good and for you know, than parents. And the fact that they're willing to spend not just the money to be in Newton, the premium on housing price in Newton, but then spend the extra premium, because the schools are ostensibly free, they're a sunk cost, but go beyond that and spend an extra $40,000 to go to a Catholic school or some other private school. I think it's a huge indictment. We lost 14% of our students, and the budget did not decrease amongst and within the schools.
Well, let's put the budget aside for the moment, because we could talk about that, but there are other reasons the budget did not go down, which include a fairly dramatic increase in the number of special ed students we have in town. And under state law, we have to have special curricula for them and special accommodations for them. But to your main point, when I was running for school committee, I must have talked to 1,000 families. And I would say that fully 80% or more of the people I talked to were raising concerns about the quality of the school system and the manner in which the school system was defining equity and carrying out its social justice goals. Just say that. The next thing, and my opponent took the opposite point of view, and I was elected. Now, so there's some indication. The next thing is we were conducting a search for a new superintendent. And we, the school committee, conducted the most extensive survey of parents and other people in town that we've seen with I think close to 2,000 or 1,500, whatever it was, people answering a survey, plus focus groups. And 70% of those people said that they were not content with the direction of the Newton Public Schools. Now, we don't know what that means, what they weren't content with, but that's a pretty high number. Then we look at private school enrollment. And of course, there was a jump up during COVID because the Newton schools were essentially closed for a period of that time, and many private schools were not. But post-COVID, there are almost 400 more students in private school than there were pre-COVID. Now that's 400 families who are spending roughly $16 million a year post-tax on private school tuition because they're not content with the Newton Public Schools for the reason you just said, because we want our kids to get the best. I asked, do we do exit interviews? Do we find out why?
Nope.
And the answer was no. Any other business in the world, if it were losing that kind of market share, would try to find out why, right? And so not only has there been a stubbornness about this in the public schools, but there's been the term I used in the public school committee meeting was a rather ostrich-like approach to this issue. Now, I will tell you, I don't know the right answer, and no one knows the right answer as to how.
I do, but I'm keeping it to myself.
Yeah, you do. But what the actual curriculum should look like, what are the pros and cons of having math classes divided by ability versus having mixed classes. There are pedagogical arguments pro and con about that. But it seems to me that part of our job as a school committee and part of the Newton Public Schools administration job, the superintendent's job, is to be in touch with the community, find out where there are concerns, and to address them. Not always to agree with them, by the way, because the authority for the curriculum lies with the superintendent. It does not lie with the school committee. But by appearing not to care about the public view, they cause a reduction in confidence. And by literally attacking people who take an opposite point of view,
Right.
that's a terrible thing for a society to do.
No,
That's
I agree.
a terrible thing.
I agree. I mean, I like to do wordplay, and I apologize, but you know, part of their ostrich sizing up is that they're ostracizing others. And so they are acting ostrich-like by putting their head in the sand. I'm not sure ostriches do this in the same way. I mean, lemmings got a bad name for jumping off cliffs. That turns out that was propaganda. It was a bad filming technique. I don't know if you know this.
No.
The lemming story is amazing. Everyone thinks lemmings jump off a cliff, but apparently there's a guy with a camera who was underneath a little ridge of lemmings, and they were jumping, and he put it on endless repeat, and National Geographic has disavowed. Anyway, so the whole lemmings don't actually do this. Societally, apparently we do. We're committing, to a certain extent, sociocide by subjugating our kids to various theories that are not necessarily helping them grow. I think kids need a solid foundation. This is kind of a conservative thing, thus the name. I'm probably on the conservative corner over here. I've talked to a lot of parents and others. I was talking with she's a health professional, mental health professional, I'll leave it at that. And she has a 14-year-old daughter, and she is scared for her life, scared for the daughter's life, because the school atmosphere is kind of pulling the rug out from the foundational bases of reality. If you watch your share of Star Trek or whatever, they go through these different worlds and realms, and gravity might be different, and air is the oxygen different. They're equipped to do that. They're adults, and that's part of their task. And if you're in war, maybe you have to deal with chemical warfare, this kind of warfare, bombing. But kids grow through solidity. We have literally the longest childhood of any mammal on Earth. We live, to whatever the median age of death is. We live decades, but we have a childhood that is literally like 12, depending on how you count it, 12 to 15 to 18, whatever number of years. A dog is an adult dog within 2 years, and most of your bigger animals still, like lions and tigers, within 2 or 3 years, they're adults. They're out doing their adult things. We have this enormous childhood so that we can live and learn and play and figure out how to deal with an intellectual capacity that exceeds the other animals. Our physical capacities don't. But you need a basis of solidity. The strongest indicator for future success is family solidity. And part of this, in a sense, is some of the philosophical solidities, like men are men, women are women, you are a woman, you're a man, you're a girl, you're going to become a woman. So a lot of these things are being pulled out from the kids. And something like 20% of her cohort in school at age 14, whatever the grade that is, 9th grade or whatever, they 20% think they are other. And for whatever the problems that we had back in the 60s and 70s growing up and so forth, that was not one of them. And I think there are extra burdens being put on kids, such as, that there's a whole kind of, questioning of their basic, XY, XX, chromosomal aspects that somehow are mutable. Like race, it turns out, I apologize for my diatribe, race is somehow immutable, that you're white, you're responsible for everything white that might have happened. You're brown, you're not, whatever. There are all these kind of class distinctions that are being part of the social justice, which I don't think is very social, nor do I think it's just justicial. I think, and there's also kind of this turning of the term equity. We started with equality, and equity, I think, is a false replacement. That's a standardization of outcomes based on, coming up with distributions of results that align with the population behind it. Now, this doesn't happen in the NBA. Because Boston is like 40-50% white, we don't have 40-50% white players on the Celtics, the Patriots, or whatever. So those things remain as merit, and meritocracy breeds success. The Celtics, God bless them, hopefully they'll succeed in the next round, but they're not going to succeed based on the ethnic composition. They're not going to succeed based on kind of equity concept. They're going to succeed only solely on how well they do their task. And so here's the question.
I was wondering.
Yeah, no, I apologize. But here's the question: Are we succeeding in our schools? And on a personal basis, you've had two sets, generational sets of children, and right now my understanding is you have one still in single digits of age by year. And what is going on with the schools then, now, and would you keep your kid in the schools based on what you've seen so far from it?
Well, one thing I don't do is discuss my family publicly. So
I apologize.
I'm not going to get into that.
I apologize.
And you've said a lot just now, Randy, and while there are aspects I agree with, I just want to make clear there are some aspects I disagree with. But I want to bring it back to what I feel is appropriate in the schools. So if our job in the schools is to raise the next generation of citizens, basically, to create a cadre of kids who can go through lifetime learning, who love learning and never stop loving learning, who are good citizens, meaning they have good critical thinking facilities, who are also respectful of people with differences. Differences, whether it's race-based, gender issues, religion, disabilities, who understand that one of the things we should do in life is follow the golden rule, which is the way Hillel put it, was to not treat people in the way we wouldn't want to be treated ourselves. Right?
I agree.
That's basic socialization that I think the schools are responsible for, along with the parents. And you'd like to see some commonality of approach between the parents and the schools on that. The schools should reflect some set of community values. And as I talk to people around the city, I see a great commonality of viewpoint on that. I don't meet many people in Newton who don't believe in social justice, who don't believe in tolerance, who don't believe in treating other people well. But what I do find in Newton is a lot of people who feel uncomfortable, at least, and sometimes more than uncomfortable, with the manner in which these issues are covered in the schools. So let me give you an example. A parent with a third grade girl wrote to the school committee a letter saying, the kids were talking about pronouns today in the classroom, and they were asked to pick their pronoun. And I said to my daughter, what pronoun did you pick? And the daughter said, I picked they. Oh, really? Why did you pick they? Well, because we were taught in school that women are oppressed, and therefore I don't want people to know that I'm a girl, so I picked they. Now, I'm not going to get into the issue of whether women are oppressed or not. I think there is still a lot of discrimination there. But is a third grader able to reach a conclusion like that? Is that an appropriately taught concept in the public schools? The mother didn't think so. She was very upset by that. She's trying to raise a daughter who is proud of being a girl and doesn't want her daughter to hide it. So that's just one example. I've received many such examples, and many people have written to the school committee and the principals and the senior administration raising those. Now, I will also say that many people have written saying, I like the way it's being done, right? So there's a difference of opinion on that. My view is we should respect that difference of opinion. Some people would be where you are, some people will be in a different place on this. And to model behavior on the part of teachers, administrators, and school committee members, model the behavior that says we can talk about these differences openly and publicly in a way that does not call one group of people oppressors and another group of people oppressed on the basis of physical characteristics, whether it's gender related or race related,
or multi-generational,
or whatever.
You know, I personally wasn't alive during slavery. You know, slavery was not a uniquely American concept. Frankly, we got rid of slavery far before most other countries in the Americas. You know, Brazil, I think, kept slavery, and they had a higher rate of slavery, and for longer than we did. The favelas, I think, you know, show a class distinction that exists still. So, you know, the United States has its problems, no doubt, and slavery was an issue, but I wasn't around for it, and my kids weren't around for it. And, you know, there's, like you say, there's kind of a labeling, and I think, you know, part of this is part of the wording that's happening. Like, I'm into justice. I think that social justice is a bit of an oxymoron. I'll give you one quick example. In New York City, just now, there was a, you know, potentially psychotic, you know, long-term criminal man, Jordan Neely, I believe his name was, who has a rap sheet, you know, longer than we could present, 40 arrests, violent man. He's, you know, apparently punched out a 65-year-old woman, you know, giving her like facial fractures and potential brain damage. He's not a nice man per se. And he's in the subway doing his shtick, as we would say. And a very brave Marine, can't remember his name, you know, amongst others, winds up subduing the gentleman. And, you know, hilarity ensues. No, tragedy ensues. And unfortunately, this guy lost his life. And, you know, social justice, I mean, justice is, you know, this man interceded. He's a Marine. He's minding his own business. I'm sure he had better things to do and someplace else to be on the subway, not to lead him into prison. You know, and he's an ex-Marine, and presumably, you know, somebody you would salute and thank for his service and thank for your safety and ability to do all the free speech we do, et cetera, et cetera. And so his life is upturned on this kind of bonfire of the vanities reversal of what justice is. And so his social justice is when you adjudicate a problem based on the social scene. And the same problem as equity, wherein you are trying to determine an outcome based on the social scene. And, you know, it's not my term of art, but I think Michael Gerson, the late Michael Gerson, wrote for one of the Bushes, and he said, you know, the soft bigotry of low expectations. If we have different expectations of people based on their race, you know, we are going to have issues within society. It's going to cause a fissure and a fracture.
So I think where most people in Newton could agree is on a couple things we would like to have happen in the schools. So at whatever age level, from elementary through high school, if a child mistreats another child and the mistreatment appears to be based on race, gender, developmental disabilities, or whatever, that those should be teaching moments where we teach children we don't treat other people that way. We treat everybody appropriately, respectfully, in a friendly manner, and so on. So personal behavior, how we play in the sandbox. I think most people would also agree that it's entirely appropriate when we're teaching history of America, for example, not only to talk about the amazing things that happened in the 1700s with the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, really world-changing events, incredibly thoughtful people, but they were creatures of their time also. So when the Declaration of Independence was written, it didn't include women, didn't include non-propertied people, it didn't include people of different racial backgrounds. And likewise, as you go through American history, when we put Japanese citizens in internment camps during World War II, something that J. Edgar Hoover actually opposed as head of the FBI, which is an interesting thing. That was a big mistake.
I understand.
And what I'm saying is, it seems to me that most people in Newton would look at those kinds of examples and say, yes, teach the good, teach the bad, teach the ugly, and also teach kids that when they're reading, whether it's on Wikipedia or in books or social media, when they're reading political and other points of view, to try to think clearly about who's saying it and why.
No,
That's very different, though, what I've just described, where I think there's a broad consensus. That's very different from telling children that you're either oppressed or an oppressor.
I agree. And this has turned into struggle sessions. And CRT is a Marxian concept. You know, the Marxist struggle never really stopped. You know, originally the Soviet version of communism, the Leninist version, was a class struggle. So it was the workers unite, workers of the world unite. That was a phraseology. And the idea was to get a certain quotient of people. Now that didn't quite work out because a lot of workers don't see themselves as workers forever. They see themselves progressing into something else. And the United States never really took hold because we have much more social mobility. You know, my grandfathers both were basically illiterate. And they both were good people and they worked really hard. And generationally, the degrees accrue and so forth. And so people don't necessarily see themselves stuck in a class. Then it became kind of national socialism, the Nazis, where they wanted identity politics, and it's your genetics, basically, the Aryan concept. And now we've kind of moved to something else, which is kind of getting people divided by race and finding their race to be something that will get people to politically align. So we only have a minute left, and I'm going to try to give you half of a last word before we end.
Well, I think this is really important for the city to resolve. And we just hired a terrific new superintendent for schools, Anna Nolan, who's, I think, experienced and thoughtful and will, I hope, will help bring people together on this. Because if we don't start to bring people together to have the discussions in an open, thoughtful, friendly way, and it continues to be divisive, it's going to be bad for the community.
Fair enough. So I'm going to end with the words of James Carville. His advice to Bill Clinton was, the economy's stupid, which was to keep your eyes on the prize. For Bill Clinton, was to fix the economy. I recommend the schools work on STEM and schooling and so forth, and try to leave the religious part or the ideological parts to extracurricular activities. Get the school test scores up. That's going to do the most for the kids and give them something that they can grasp onto. So my recommendation is, the schooling stupid, because kids come out, they come out as formless, and we're supposed to help form them, and we're not, I don't think, doing them a service by giving them political ideas in advance of their capabilities of absorbing them.